The inspiration for this video was GoldenEye for the N64. Specifically, when you pause the game, Bond goes to his wristwatch, which is, in and of itself, the item menu. I'm not clued up enough on copyright to know if I can include the music for this, but if you can hear it in your head from experience, you'll know as far as pause music goes, this goes hard. It got me wondering though, I've made a video on watches in film, but what about watches in video games? There are some rules that I've followed in making my selections for this video, and the first one is important. It turns out that as far as I can tell, it isn't really possible to make a list of budget watches that appear in video games. There are some, but really not many. So to compromise, I've also featured watches whose design has been inspired by video games. If a model ticks either of those boxes, it can be on the list. Secondly, the watch has to be available for less than $1,000 at the time of writing. And finally, for the sake of variety, each brand can only feature on the list once. With all that said, let's get into the video. You'll have noticed that there is a pretty big price discrepancy in the stated range for these models. That is mostly down to the themed F100 limited edition model, which released back in 2021 and has risen in demand and reduced in availability ever since, leading to the roughly $700 asking price now. This was a watch that actually sold out within hours of its release. The other four models in the range released in 2024. For me personally, the calculator model is the pick of the bunch, and these are currently a lot more accessible and indeed affordable, with some neat theming and colour schemes that fit into the overall Pac-Man theme. Back in 1978, Space Invaders was groundbreaking. It was the world's first fixed-target shoot-'em-up game, and its simple but iconic gameplay loop has cemented it as one of the most recognisable video games ever made. In tribute to this, back in 2022, Timex released a version of their digital T80 model with the game quite literally printed on the front of the watch and also adorning the caseback. While a limited edition model, really there were plenty of units made across the three colourways, black, gold and steel, and you can pick them up today as new old stock quite easily. There is a fourth full colour version, but that's admittedly a little harder to find. As a nice little aside, some of the button press sounds have been replaced with Space Invaders sound effects. If you're of a certain vintage, I'm sure you'll remember watches like these in the playground throughout the late 80s and early 90s. Essentially, they were tiny playable levels with horrible controls that you couldn't really see very clearly with a tiny digital time display. I wouldn't remotely have advised buying one at the time, but they're now a real slice of nostalgia, with models from Tetris and Super Mario Bros. 3 being amongst the most sought after. You can get pre-owned pieces in varying states of condition, but there are also a few considerably more expensive listings for unopened models. Though in honesty, I think these are more likely to be investment pieces at this point, as silly as that may sound. This one is a very different proposition to the others on the list, but I feel it deserves a mention here. It's a Kickstarter project, and while it doesn't have a direct link to any specific games, it is proposing to be a portable games console in and of itself. Essentially, the idea boils down to creating a device that is roughly the same dimensions as an Apple Watch that detaches from its wrist mounting to play games on, roughly based on the form factor of the original Game Boy. But it has the scope to play the kind of games that you might have found on the SNES or Mega Drive. I mentioned the project about a year ago on the channel, and it's nice to see that it has been regularly updated since then, though I dare say there is still a way to go before its actual release. I've got to be honest, I'm not actually a fan of playing Bethesda games, but I do love watching videos of other people trying to turn them upside down and break them. For clarity, I highly doubt you'll actually be able to find this particular model. It was an extremely limited run from a very small watch brand nearly a decade ago, and the price stated is actually the original cost, as unfortunately I wasn't able to track any second-hand pieces down. However, there are a number of Bethesda and fan-made Pip Boys out there, and some of them do have time-telling functionality. If you consider the whole thing to be a watch rather than a wrist-mounted computer, then maybe those could feature here too. It's more of a fun suggestion than a serious one though, in all honesty. Another slice of honesty, I'm putting these pieces on the list because of my love for the game series and the publisher far more than the actual timepieces themselves. They're basically quartz fashion pieces themed around specific games or characters from the series. If you're looking for something Final Fantasy themed that comes from a recognised horological brand, Citizen did make a range of Final Fantasy collaborative chronograph pieces back in 2021, but only for the Japanese domestic market, so unless you live out there you would need to import them, which would run the cost up to somewhere around $400. There are also a range of Seiko collab models planned, but those are going to run into a few $1,000s. I've been to Akihabara a few times in my life at this point, and it never ceases to amaze me how many people are still playing various versions of Street Fighter 2 in the arcades at random times throughout the day. One testament to the legacy and ongoing popularity of the series is a set of watches based on 6 of the stable characters from Seiko as part of their 5 sports range. Each model is themed around the character's history and in-game aesthetic, with the relatively subdued version for Ken contrasting massively against the more out there models like Blanka and Zangief. There have been quite a few different manufacturers who've held the official license to use Pokemon as a theme for their watches at this point. In my opinion, the best of the bunch to date is the Citizen range based around the Eeveelutions, with each one getting its own themed timepiece. The issue is that Pokemon collecting has become really big business once again, mainly themed around the trading card game, but some of that has spilled over into every other form of apparel and memorabilia related to the brand. As this range came out in 2022, prices have been slowly creeping up on the second-hand market. It's not completely out of control yet, but some models are definitely spiking in price more than others. As with all smartwatches, new versions release all the time, so the price range for the Tactix Delta ends up being all over the place. I've featured the cost for a new old stock base model, but the newer Pro versions will run well beyond $1,000. I've featured this piece not because it actually features or links to any game in particular, but because it has the generic look of almost every tactical digital watch that does feature in video games, but are nondescript to avoid any licensing issues. Yes, I am bending my own rules here. A good example of this would be the watch that Nomad wears in Ghost Recon. A little tenuous, I grant you, but this is me realizing that this list is actually a lot harder to make than I first thought. Blonie are a Polish watchmaker that restarted as a brand in 2012. While I understand that CD Projekt Red, the team behind Cyberpunk, has made huge improvements to the game, it was such a mess at launch that I've never actually tried it. What I have done is spent a huge amount of time listening to the soundtrack, but that's another matter. As part of the game's launch, a collaborative watch was produced, which is a titanium digital piece, and alongside it came some NFT blockchain nonsense that I won't dwell on here. Really, the watch is a homage to the Girard-Perregaux casquette. It's a pretty penny, but it's $4,000 less than the real deal and still looks pretty cool. So there we have it, what I consider to be the 10 best video game watches available for less than $1,000. I don't think a lot of these pieces will necessarily have general appeal amongst fans of horology or indeed collectors, but that's the point that is easy to miss. This is a way to get more people engaged in the hobby by hooking them in with things that they are invested in. If, like me, you happen to be a fan of both, even better. Though I must say, when it comes to recognising my geeky nature, I'm generally a fan of subtle nods to video game culture. I'd love to hear your experiences with gaming, gaming watches, and this list in general. Are there any pieces that could, or indeed should, have featured that you know of? I actually only found 2 examples of watches that you can buy that are actually in the games they're based on. The AGAM 601 from Metal Gear Solid 5 and the Hamilton Khaki Field from Far Cry 6, neither of which fits on this list for budgetary reasons. There is also the Tag Heuer Mario collection, which isn't in-game but does deserve a mention. As a final aside, are any of you gamers? I'm currently playing through the Suikoden Remaster series on the new Switch and binge-watching League of Legends games in the run-up to MSI. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found it informative, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this in future.